I don't want him to go and tell his uncle one thing and then have to go back and tell him again. Let's go. Whether he forgives me or not, I have to finish telling him the truth. But he's already so angry with me. How am I going to get through it? I am terrified that Daniel's going to leave me forever once he finds out. I've been with more than one woman. It's not as bad as...
Don't come close to me.
The room was quiet, almost suffocatingly so, but the air itself seemed to hum with tension. The kind of tension that makes every movement feel loaded, every glance sharp, every pause heavy with unsaid words. And then Lisa spoke. The words that would shatter the fragile balance of everything they thought they knew about each other. She started carefully, cautiously, almost as if she were trying to test the waters before diving in. But it didn't matter. Daniel heard enough in her tone to know that this was no ordinary confession. His face hardened, his eyes narrowed, and a flicker of disbelief crossed his features. For Daniel, the world seemed to tilt on its axis in that instant. He had braced himself for a revelation about her being still legally married. He had expected shock, yes, but not this. Not the layers of hidden truths that seemed to pour out from every corner of her confession. And when Lisa revealed the truth that her spouse was a woman, and that she had only been in relationships with women for over 20 years, it was as if the floor beneath him had vanished. He recoiled, instinctively stepping back, his body echoing the emotional distance that now existed between them. It's hard to overstate just how destabilizing a revelation like this can be, particularly in a relationship already fraught with tension. Up until now, Daniel believed he had at least some understanding of Lisa's situation. Her secret, as he understood it, was limited. She was still legally married, sure, but the emotional and cultural impact felt contained, tangible, something he thought he could manage. This new information, however, was a curveball of a completely different magnitude. It was one thing to process a delayed divorce, it's quite another to recalibrate your entire perception of someone's history and identity in a matter of moments. Daniel's mind was running through multiple tracks at once. On one hand, there was the immediate sting of betrayal. He had trusted her, invested emotionally, and believed he was seeing her as she truly was. That trust was now shattered. On another track, he was calculating almost mechanically the potential implications for their future. What did this mean for their relationship? For the possibility of marriage? For his dream of moving forward with the life he had imagined with her? And layered atop all of this was a deeply ingrained cultural expectation. The need to consult his uncle before making any serious decision. That tradition had been a guiding principle in his life, and now it loomed over the situation like an unspoken authority, adding weight to every reaction he considered. Lisa, meanwhile, was navigating a very different emotional landscape. Her panic was palpable, yet beneath it ran a desperate kind of hope. She believed that by finally being completely honest, she could repair the damage. But fear crept in at every word, twisting her stomach and making her voice tremble. She had delayed this confession for too long, and now the consequences were immediate. Every glance from Daniel, every pause, every sharp intake of breath from him felt like a judgment passed in real time. As the confession continued, Daniel's reaction oscillated between visible disbelief and rigid control. He didn't immediately lash out. Instead, he withdrew, signaling through body language that the emotional space between them had become physical. He turned slightly, angled away from her, his hands crossed in front of him in a defensive gesture. This refusal to engage directly wasn't passive, it was charged. Every subtle movement broadcasted his internal chaos to Lisa, and by extension, to the audience observing the scene unfold. There was a silent question hanging between them. Why now? Why had Lisa waited until this moment to reveal such a pivotal part of her past? Daniel's mind circled this question, tangled with another. Had he suspected something deeper all along? The uncertainty intensified every second of their exchange. He couldn't yet differentiate between the anger at the lie itself and the shock at the reality of the revelation. And Lisa, hyper-aware of his reactions, tried to fill the space with explanations, with context, with fragments of reasoning, but each one seemed only to complicate the situation further. Psychologically, this moment is fascinating. Daniel is operating in what we could call shock processing mode. His brain is triaging information in real time, attempting to reconcile deeply conflicting inputs, emotional investment versus perceived betrayal, cultural expectation versus personal judgment, love versus practicality. For him, every word Lisa utters is a data point he must process before deciding whether he can continue to trust her or whether he should cut his losses entirely. Lisa, in contrast, is experiencing what we might call panic-driven honesty. She's aware that the consequences of hiding the truth any longer are severe. Yet she also knows that revealing too much too soon could destroy the fragile threads holding them together. Her mind is split between the hope that truth can mend the breach and the fear that it will be the final nail in the coffin. Every word, every hesitation, every glance is loaded with that tension, creating a kind of emotional tightrope act. As the minutes tick by, small signals magnify the stakes further. Daniel refuses to let her come close to him, his body language creating a clear barrier. The physical distance mirrors the emotional chasm now separating them. It's a move that communicates anger, distrust, and disbelief all at once. For Lisa, it's a punch to the chest. Her desire for connection meets a wall of resistance, leaving her almost breathless with anxiety. And yet, even in this charged atmosphere, subtle psychological dynamics are at play. Daniel's withdrawal is not just anger, it's also a form of processing. A way to gain control over a situation that suddenly feels chaotic and unpredictable. He's trying to recalibrate his expectations to understand the new variables introduced by Lisa's revelation. For Lisa, every second Daniel remains distant increases the pressure to justify, to explain, to repair. But with each attempt, she risks deepening the gap, feeding the uncertainty rather than resolving it. Many cliffhangers pepper the scene, layering tension in a way that keeps viewers glued. For example, when Daniel steps back, we are left questioning, will he walk out completely or will he stay? When Lisa hesitates mid-sentence, wondering how to frame the next part of her confession, the audience is left wondering what she will reveal next, and whether it will break him entirely or leave a crack through which reconciliation might sneak. The cultural layer adds another dimension of complexity. Daniel's need to consult his uncle is not incidental, it's deeply embedded in his decision-making framework. This tradition now looms over the couple like a silent judge. It's not just about personal feelings anymore, it's about family, heritage, and approval. For Lisa, this creates a ticking clock scenario. The longer she waits, the closer the uncle becomes a gatekeeper to any possibility of forgiveness. Every delay increases the stakes and heightens the tension. Meanwhile, Daniel's mental processing is remarkable to watch. He is balancing immediate emotional shock with practical considerations about the future. He's asking himself whether this is a relationship worth salvaging, whether he can accept this new truth, and how the family tradition factors into his decision. At the same time, he must consider what this revelation says about Lisa's reliability, honesty, and intention. This multi-layered internal debate is invisible, yet it drives every subtle shift in his posture and expression. As the act progresses, the stakes escalate further. The emotional space between them grows, yet there are moments where it feels like it could collapse back into intimacy or erupt into confrontation. Lisa reaches out verbally, trying to bridge the gap, but every word seems to risk a misstep. Daniel's reactions, tight-lipped and guarded, create a sense of unpredictability. The viewer senses that any small trigger, a phrase, a look, a gesture, could push this scene into full-blown conflict. Many cliffhangers continue to punctuate the act. When Daniel turns away after a particularly intense part of the confession, the question arises, will he ever face her directly again? When Lisa's eyes fill with tears, we are left wondering if her emotional vulnerability will elicit compassion, frustration, or further anger. Each beat keeps the audience on edge, layering curiosity and anticipation that demands continued viewing. At the end of this act, the tension reaches its highest point. Daniel's mind is spinning, Lisa is panicked but determined, and the cultural and relational stakes are higher than ever. The emotional and psychological threads are woven tightly, leaving no sense of resolution, only escalating anticipation. And in that charged silence, one unspoken question looms larger than all the rest. How many more secrets are there? This is the hinge point. Everything that follows, from the resort trip to the full confrontation, pivots on this single unresolved question. The audience is left wondering not only about the immediate fallout, but also about the deeper implications for trust, compatibility, and the future of their relationship. And as the act concludes, The stage is perfectly set for the next sequence, the calculated moves, the subtle power plays, and the emotional negotiation that will define the coming moments. The final image lingers in the mind, Daniel standing at a measured distance, eyes fixed, jaw tight, the weight of cultural expectation, personal betrayal, and uncertain desire all pressing down. Lisa, vulnerable and trembling, facing the full consequence of delayed honesty, her next words poised to either heal or destroy. And in that charged space, the viewer knows what happens next is not just about revelation. It's about whether two people bound by love, expectation, and deception can even find common ground. The scene closes, leaving the door wide open for the next act, where strategy, emotion, and hidden motives collide in a setting designed to test the limits of both patience and trust. The tension didn't just evaporate after Lisa's first confession. In fact, it was the kind of tension that seemed to grow thicker the longer she stayed in Daniel's presence. He had recoiled, yes, but he hadn't stormed out. He hadn't shouted, hadn't ended the relationship in that instant. And that hesitation, half disbelief, half calculation, left Lisa scrambling to figure out what to do next. She had just unleashed a truth that could very well have ended everything, and now she was left in a precarious state, terrified that Daniel would leave her, but also desperate to seize whatever tiny lifeline had been offered. From the outside, it might have looked like Daniel was punishing her, holding her at arm's length. But what viewers would begin to notice is that there was strategy embedded in his distance. Every glance he avoided, every step he took backward, every sharp reply was not only a reaction to shock, it was a test. Daniel had now entered what we might call a power balancing mode. By stepping away, by enforcing space between them, he was subtly establishing authority in a relationship suddenly complicated by deception and cultural expectation. His withdrawal created a vacuum of uncertainty, and uncertainty, as we know, is a powerful tool in human dynamics. Lisa, sensing the gap, immediately began to formulate a plan. Her panic, emotional and visceral, was coupled with a sharp, almost tactical mind. She recognized the danger. If Daniel were to involve his uncle immediately, the chain reaction could be catastrophic. His uncle's opinion wasn't a casual input, it was effectively a gatekeeper. If he heard the full story before Daniel had processed it himself, Lisa's influence over the situation could be lost entirely. She needed a way to delay that involvement, a method to manage the fallout before it escalated. Enter the romantic getaway. On the surface, it seems simple. A chance to reconnect, to remind Daniel of the bond they had built, to recapture some of the intimacy that had been temporarily fractured. But as any strategist would note, this wasn't just about rekindling affection. This trip was a carefully orchestrated maneuver, a way to manipulate time, emotion, and proximity. By getting Daniel physically away from his usual environment and offering him a controlled, pleasant setting, Lisa created a buffer zone. It was in this buffer that she could attempt to soften him, rebuild trust, and ideally, buy herself time to reveal the full extent of her history on her own terms. From Daniel's perspective, the decision to accept the trip was layered with his own calculus. Was he genuinely attempting to salvage their connection, or was he simply buying time, keeping Lisa close while he processed the revelations and weighed his next move? The ambiguity of his motives kept the tension high, both for Lisa and the audience. Every acceptance, every hesitant nod, every moment of compliance was a potential pivot point. Was he truly opening the door to reconciliation, or setting a trap to gauge her reactions further? This ambiguity created an open loop that the audience couldn't ignore. They were left questioning every gesture and word, analyzing the subtle power dynamics unfolding in real time. As they prepared for the trip, new rules emerged, signaling a dramatic shift in the dynamics of their relationship. Daniel explicitly established boundaries. No kissing, no intimacy, no gestures of affection until he had the chance to consult his uncle. What might seem minor in another context was a seismic change in the tone of their relationship. Romantic gestures now felt constrained, negotiations replaced natural emotional expression, and every shared moment carried a subtext of tension. This wasn't just a couple on a vacation, it was a negotiation table, where every look, every touch, and every word carried the weight of potential consequence. Lisa, naturally, was uneasy. The trip was supposed to be a lifeline, a chance to rebuild, yet these new rules reminded her constantly of the fragility of her position. She had orchestrated this escape, and yet, within hours of arriving, she found herself navigating a minefield of restrictions she hadn't fully anticipated. It wasn't the getaway she had envisioned. It was a stage, carefully controlled by Daniel's emotional distancing, cultural expectations, and the looming authority of his uncle. Despite the boundaries, subtle psychological maneuvers began to surface on both sides. Daniel's withdrawal and enforcement of rules weren't just defensive, they were strategic. By limiting intimacy, he maintained control over the pace and depth of their interactions, keeping Lisa uncertain, off balance, and emotionally reactive. Lisa, conversely, was operating in what could be called a proactive panic mode. She was aware of the stakes, how quickly the situation could spiral beyond her influence, and she began testing subtle ways to rebuild connection, suggesting shared activities, initiating light conversation, and offering moments of vulnerability. Each of these moves was layered with intent, a careful attempt to manipulate emotional cues in her favor while minimizing the risk of provoking him further. Early in the trip, these dynamics were immediately evident. Simple activities, walking along a trail, sharing a meal, even choosing seats in the resort's lounge, became exercises in psychological negotiation. Daniel, still guarded, measured each step, each smile, each engagement. Lisa, equally aware, tried to appear casual and carefree, but the underlying urgency of her motives added a tension that hovered over every interaction. The audience, observing this, was drawn into a layered narrative. Outwardly, a couple trying to reconnect; inwardly, a high-stakes battle for emotional leverage and control. Many cliffhangers appeared naturally through these interactions. For example, when Daniel agreed to share a room, the immediate question arose, was this an act of trust or a calculated risk? When Lisa hesitated to bring up specific topics, viewers were left wondering if she was delaying another revelation or testing whether Daniel had begun to suspect something deeper. Every small choice carried dual interpretations, keeping the audience constantly analyzing and emotionally invested. As the days progressed, subtle power shifts began to take shape. Daniel, by enforcing strict boundaries, managed to keep Lisa both close and at a safe distance. This duality created a constant state of tension, proximity without security. For Lisa, the closeness was tantalizing, but the restrictions reminded her how much control Daniel held over the situation. She was tethered emotionally yet restrained, and this combination of hope and fear became the core emotional engine of the act. Psychologically, the getaway functioned as a microcosm of the broader relationship dynamic. Daniel, in asserting rules and boundaries, maintained authority without resorting to confrontation. Lisa, through proactive engagement and strategic vulnerability, attempted to regain influence without provoking total withdrawal. The delicate balance of power kept the narrative charged, offering viewers continuous emotional spikes without the need for overt drama. By the midpoint of the trip, the tension had escalated in another dimension. Even mundane obstacles, delayed check-ins, less than luxurious accommodations, minor miscommunications became symbols of their deeper relational struggle. A room that didn't match Lisa's expectations wasn't just a practical annoyance, it was a subtle mirror of the mismatch in their expectations, the gaps in understanding, and the fragility of trust. Each small frustration acted as a metaphorical amplifier, heightening the stakes in ways that kept the audience psychologically engaged. Meanwhile, the open loop regarding Daniel's uncle loomed persistently in the background. Lisa knew that any disclosure or action could trigger his involvement, yet she could not control the timing. This uncertainty added a ticking clock element. The longer she delayed, the higher the risk of losing agency entirely. The audience, aware of this looming variable, is left continually anticipating the moment when the uncle becomes involved, and whether it will be a source of salvation or destruction. Throughout the act, the emotional tension oscillated between hope and unease. Moments of tentative connection, shared laughter during a resort activity, a fleeting smile across a breakfast table were juxtaposed against strict boundaries, calculated silences, and the ever-present threat of revelation. This oscillation created a rhythm that maintained high viewer engagement, peaks of emotional warmth followed immediately by reminders of fragility and potential disaster. Mini tension spikes continued to punctuate the narrative. When Daniel gently reminded her of the no intimacy rule, viewers are left questioning whether his tone was fair, punitive, or strategic. When Lisa attempted to touch his arm in a moment of vulnerability and he subtly pulled away, it created another immediate suspense point. Would she overstep? And what would the consequence be? Each of these small beats function like miniature cliffhangers, sustaining curiosity and emotional investment across the act. Finally, the act introduces its most critical revelation. Lisa admits privately to the production team that she still hasn't revealed everything to Daniel. The camera captures the fear in her eyes, the tension in her voice, and the awareness that the next disclosure could end everything. This admission is a psychological hook for viewers, creating a layered anticipation. What exactly is she hiding? Why has she delayed it? And how will Daniel respond when the next truth comes out? The act closes with a sense of fragile equilibrium. Daniel remains physically and emotionally restrained, navigating the boundaries he has set. Lisa is on edge, oscillating between hope and dread, using every available tactic to manage both his reactions and the looming influence of his uncle. The trip, designed as a safe space for reconnection, has instead become a crucible of strategy, emotion, and psychological warfare. The transition to the next act is set. The audience knows that the next revelation is coming, and the question is no longer if, but when, and with what consequences. Lisa's hidden truth, the secret before the secret, is poised to break the careful balance, force new decisions, and redefine every relational calculation made so far. Viewers are left hanging on the edge of suspense, fully primed for the emotional escalation that will deliver. From the moment Lisa and Daniel stepped into the resort, the energy was palpable. But not in the way Lisa had hoped. This wasn't the romantic escape she'd envisioned. The crisp air, the sunlit pathways, the promise of private time together, it all felt overshadowed by the tension that had been building for weeks. On the surface, it looked like a getaway, a chance for reconnection. But underneath, every step, every glance, every word was loaded with the weight of secrets and expectations. The couple tried to put on smiles, but awkwardness hovered like a cloud. Even casual conversations were tinged with caution. Lisa, acutely aware of how much Daniel had pulled back since learning she was still married, pushed to maintain a veneer of positivity. She laughed at small jokes, suggested activities, tried to spark spontaneous moments. Daniel responded minimally, smiling politely, nodding, but always maintaining an invisible line of distance. Every gesture from him carried a dual meaning. Was he open to reconciliation, or was this a test? Viewers immediately sensed that tension. What looks like casual friendliness is actually a barometer for the underlying relationship instability. Then came the spider. Now, in any normal scenario, a spider in a hotel room might be an annoying inconvenience, maybe a brief scare, but here, it became a crystallization of the larger issues. Lisa froze, visibly terrified, and immediately looked to Daniel for support. But instead of the expected protective reaction, Daniel hesitated. He didn't offer comfort, didn't remove the spider, didn't reassure her. The symbolic weight of this moment hit hard. He was no longer stepping into the role of protector, of savior, of partner. By letting Lisa struggle with something so minor in other contexts, Daniel was expressing his lingering resentment in subtle, almost passive-aggressive ways. The spider became a small stage for their larger dynamic. Each glance, each movement, each refusal from Daniel carried an unspoken message. He was still hurt, still angry, still holding power. Lisa, in her panic, tried to reason, tried to persuade him to help, but Daniel's refusal was firm. He watched as she confronted her fear alone. And in that moment, every viewer can see the shift. The emotional labor of the relationship had changed hands, and Lisa was now carrying it alone. Despite this, Lisa remained determined to find the silver lining. She clung to every small positive sign, a shared laugh at dinner, a glance exchanged during a resort activity, a brief conversation during a walk along the property. She interpreted these fleeting moments as evidence that the trip was working, that Daniel was softening, that hope remained. From a psychological standpoint, this is classic selective perception. When someone is desperate to repair a bond, they will often emphasize signs of progress no matter how minor, while minimizing signals of ongoing conflict. The tension escalated as they navigated daily resort routines. Every interaction became a subtle negotiation. Seating arrangements at breakfast, who chose the next activity, even how they interacted with resort staff. Daniel's continued restraint was a quiet assertion of control. He wasn't verbally confronting Lisa, but every small act reinforced his emotional distance. For example, when Lisa tried to initiate light physical contact, a hand on his arm during a game, or a playful gesture, Daniel's responses were measured, almost clinical. No rejection, but no reciprocation. This ambiguity kept Lisa guessing, and crucially, it kept the audience invested in decoding his behavior. This push and pull created a rhythm that kept emotional tension high. For every moment of connection, there was an almost immediate reminder of fragility, a withheld smile, a delayed response, a subtle refusal. Viewers are caught in a cycle of hope and unease alongside Lisa, fully immersed in the emotional stakes of the getaway. The drama isn't explosive, it's psychological, layered, and slow burning, which is perfect for sustained retention. Later that evening, a key development shifted the narrative. Daniel, in a surprisingly conciliatory tone, mentioned the uncle. Not as a threat, but as a possibility, he might still seek forgiveness on Lisa's behalf. For a moment, the weight of weeks of tension seemed to lift. Lisa, predictably, latched onto this glimmer of hope. It was validation that her strategy might be working, that the trip had accomplished something beyond her initial expectations. For viewers, this created a classic mini cliffhanger. Could this be the turning point? Could Daniel truly be softening, or was this merely another step in his careful, calculated approach to testing her loyalty and honesty? Psychologically, this moment revealed the complexity of both characters. Daniel's willingness to consider asking his uncle suggested internal conflict. He was balancing anger, cultural obligations, and lingering affection. For Lisa, the emotional swing was immediate. Relief, gratitude, and excitement temporarily replaced panic. But the underlying fear never fully disappeared. She knew instinctively that the full truth, the secret she still hadn't shared, could undo everything. Every hopeful moment was shadowed by the ticking clock of revelation. The dynamics of the trip continued to oscillate between forced positivity and underlying tension. They engaged in activities designed to foster bonding, a shared meal, a resort-organized game, even a walk along the beach. Yet every smile, every laugh was layered with complexity. Lisa interpreted engagement as success, while Daniel's measured participation suggested ambivalence. The contrast between perceived progress and unspoken resentment created what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Lisa's desire for reconciliation clashed with the reality of Daniel's restrained behavior, making each positive moment feel simultaneously hopeful and precarious. Even the environment of the resort played a role in amplifying the tension. The resort, while intended as a safe and controlled space, was not luxurious or flawless. Misaligned expectations about accommodations, minor inconveniences with service, or differences in itinerary became symbolic extensions of their larger relational challenges. Each small frustration, whether a subpar room or a missed dinner reservation, functioned as an emotional amplifier. It reminded them and the audience that the external environment reflected the internal instability of their connection. The day progressed with subtle power shifts. Daniel's continued enforcement of rules, no intimacy, no kissing, boundaries around physical proximity, kept Lisa navigating a landscape where hope and fear were tightly intertwined. She tried to appear casual and composed, but viewers could see the strain beneath her laughter and attempts at charm. Every gesture, every interaction became a measure of emotional leverage. By nightfall, the stakes felt heavier than ever. The combination of minor inconveniences, Daniel's restrained behavior, and Lisa's internal anxiety created an almost suffocating tension. It was the kind of tension that makes viewers lean in, watching carefully for the next micro shift in behavior. When Daniel once again mentioned that he might speak to his uncle to seek forgiveness, the audience experienced a spike in anticipation. This was a glimmer, yes, but it also served as a subtle setup for the next major escalation. Viewers are left wondering, is this a genuine path to reconciliation or another test? And most importantly, how will Lisa respond when the final secret, the one she had carefully delayed revealing, comes to light? Throughout the evening, Daniel continued to maintain a carefully calibrated distance. Small refusals, subtle corrections, and restrained engagement demonstrated that while he was willing to participate, he was not surrendering authority. Every action was measured, reinforcing the notion that trust had to be earned and that Lisa's prior deception had altered the fundamental balance of their relationship. Lisa, meanwhile, oscillated between interpreting these signals optimistically and succumbing to anxiety. This emotional roller coaster became the driving engine for the act, sustaining viewer engagement by constantly questioning who truly held the upper hand. The act also explores the psychological phenomenon of misinterpretation. Lisa consistently reads positive signs as proof that the relationship is repairing. But Daniel's behavior is complex and layered. His actions may be motivated by lingering affection, cultural obligation, personal strategy, or a combination of these factors. Viewers, along with Lisa, are left guessing. Is Daniel softening, or is he simply keeping her close until he can fully assess the situation? The uncertainty drives retention, as audiences remain invested in decoding each interaction and anticipating the impending revelation. As the night deepened, Lisa's anxiety reached its peak. Alone with the camera crew, she admitted in private confessionals that the final layer of truth had not yet been revealed. Her voice trembled as she acknowledged that this truth could destroy everything: the relationship, Daniel's trust, and the fragile hope she had clung to during the trip. This confession to the audience acts as a layered open loop, creating a sense of inevitability. Viewers now anticipate that the truth is about to surface, but they do not know when, how, or with what immediate consequence. The act closes on a pivotal note. The hope Daniel offered with the mention of his uncle is precisely the moment that Lisa decides she can no longer delay. She recognizes that time is short, that suspense cannot be maintained indefinitely, and that the truth must come out even if it risks everything. The tension is razor sharp. The audience is aware that a confrontation is imminent, that Daniel's reaction is unpredictable, and that cultural, personal, and emotional stakes are all colliding at once. By the end of this act, the trip, intended as a tool to rebuild connection, has instead revealed the deep-seated fractures in the relationship. Daniel's restrained behavior, the symbolic power plays, and Lisa's anxious attempts to salvage control have escalated the tension to a point where viewers are fully invested in what comes next. Every small detail, from the spider to the playful interactions, serves as a microcosm of the larger relational struggle, trust, control, deception, and hope intertwined in a high-stakes emotional dance. The stage is now set for the ultimate confrontation. Lisa's decision to finally reveal her final secret, her marriage to a woman, and her long history of same-sex relationships promises to upend everything. The audience is left in a state of moral tension, unsure how Daniel will respond, and fully primed for the escalation of conflict in. Every carefully built open loop from the trip, from Daniel's boundaries, from Lisa's misinterpretations, and from the symbolic moments like the spider, converge to create anticipation that ensures the viewer remains glued to the next chapter of this unfolding drama. The moment had arrived. Every awkward glance, every tense silence, every carefully measured step on the resort grounds had led to this. Lisa knew she could no longer wait. She had built up a fragile illusion of reconnection, carefully navigating Daniel's resentment, selectively interpreting moments of warmth, and buying herself time with the getaway. But the truth she had hidden for so long was now pressing like a storm cloud, impossible to ignore. She took a deep breath, knowing this could either save or utterly destroy what little remained of their fragile bond. The conversation began carefully, almost cautiously, with Lisa testing the waters. "Daniel," she said, voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest, "do you know that in America, same-sex marriage is legal?" It was a subtle prelude, a gentle probe meant to gauge his openness before dropping the heavier revelation. Daniel, sensing the tension but unsure of her intentions, furrowed his brow, confused. He nodded slowly, not fully understanding where this was heading. The question itself carried a weight, a subtle signal to the audience that something monumental was about to unfold. And then she landed the first blow. My spouse, She's a woman, Lisa revealed, carefully choosing each word, yet unable to shield the impact from her own voice. Daniel's eyes widened, the confusion giving way to disbelief. This was not a conversation he had anticipated, not even in his darkest imaginings after her first confession about still being married. But the shock didn't stop there. Lisa pressed further, eyes locking on his as she continued, "And I haven't been with a man in 21 years. The words hit like a hurricane. The room felt smaller. The warm glow of the resort lighting seemed to dim under the gravity of the revelation. For Daniel, it wasn't just a surprise. It was a complete collapse of expectation. Everything he believed about their relationship, about the future he had imagined, suddenly felt destabilized. He began to question every interaction, every shared laugh, every moment of perceived intimacy. How much of this had been real? How much had been constructed by a version of Lisa he had never truly known? The psychological shock was palpable. For viewers, the tension here is layered. On the surface, it's drama, a secret revealed that changes the game entirely. But underneath, there's a psychological puzzle. Daniel's confusion is just the first step. He must reconcile three conflicting internal narratives: the woman he thought he loved, the cultural expectations pressing on him, and the personal desires he had invested in the relationship. Each thought is like a spinning top, threatening to topple and leave him unsteady, and every viewer feels that instability. Lisa, meanwhile, experiences a different kind of turbulence. This confession, while terrifying, is also liberating. She has carried the secret for years, letting fear dictate the timing and method of disclosure. Finally, she allows herself to step out of the panic zone and embrace honesty. Yet that honesty comes with a cost. She can see in Daniel's body language the disbelief and the hurt, the mental wheels turning as he recalibrates his understanding of everything. Her hope that honesty might save the relationship is now intertwined with terror. Could this be the very moment it all ends? The emotional escalation is immediate. Daniel's reaction is not mild surprise or quiet contemplation, it's an instinctive withdrawal. He steps back, physically distancing himself, erecting boundaries that were only previously metaphorical. "Don't come near me," he says, each word heavy with incredulity and anger. Lisa freezes. For a moment, the room seems to shrink around them. Every inch of space charged with the collision of truth and disbelief. The audience, conditioned by weeks of build-up and careful pacing, experiences that collision with full intensity. Daniel's mind is racing. He isn't just upset about deception, he's grappling with identity conflict and cultural tension simultaneously. He wonders if he ever truly knew Lisa, if the bond they built was based on reality or a carefully constructed narrative she had maintained. Was he a participant in a relationship that was never truly aligned with his expectations, cultural norms, or personal desires? Every instinct urges him to retreat, to step back from the chaos of revelation, yet another part of him remains tethered by history, hope, and attachment. Lisa, reading his physical and emotional distance, is gripped by a mix of desperation and resignation. She realizes the stakes have never been higher. This isn't about forgiveness anymore, it's about survival of the relationship itself. Every carefully laid plan, every calculated strategy to delay Daniel's knowledge now feels simultaneously brilliant and futile. She had orchestrated the trip to control the timing, to soften him, to buy herself a buffer before revealing the full truth. Yet in this moment, strategy matters less than raw emotional truth. Even as the words hang in the room, unspoken consequences ripple outward. Daniel's immediate rejection of physical proximity isn't just symbolic, it's an assertion of control and a reflection of internal conflict. By physically withdrawing, he establishes a boundary that signals emotional recalibration. For viewers, it's a classic retention spike. The combination of shock, visible rejection, and emotional stakes creates an irresistible what happens next moment. Lisa attempts to bridge the gap, her voice trembling but determined. She tries to explain why she delayed, why she orchestrated the getaway, why she feared his reaction. Each word is a delicate thread, attempting to mend a tear in a fabric that feels increasingly shredded. But Daniel's face is unreadable. A mask of mixed emotions, anger, disbelief, hurt, confusion, and perhaps a reluctant curiosity. Every micro-expression invites viewers to pause and decode, sustaining engagement while escalating psychological tension. The confession also crystallizes earlier open loops. The audience finally understands why Lisa orchestrated the trip. It wasn't just a romantic gesture, it was a calculated attempt to create a controlled environment for a revelation that she feared could destroy everything. The delay in telling Daniel was no longer mere avoidance, it was an effort at damage control, a psychological attempt to manage his reaction. Yet even as these loops are closed, new questions emerge. Will Daniel forgive her? Will he even understand? Or has the revelation crossed a line from which the relationship cannot recover? Small behavioral cues continue to fuel suspense. Daniel avoids eye contact at times, yet his hands tremble slightly, betraying a deeper emotional reaction. Lisa watches him closely, interpreting every movement, every breath, trying to gauge whether there is a pathway forward. The audience experiences this oscillation of hope and dread in real time. Each pause, each silence becomes a narrative device, extending the tension while layering the act with multiple mini cliffhangers. Lisa, sensing the gravity of the moment, presses further. She provides context, trying to frame the revelation in a way that Daniel might process it without completely shutting down. She emphasizes that the relationships she had over the past 21 years were meaningful, but also reassures him that her intentions toward him are sincere. This framing is critical for maintaining audience engagement. It introduces moral tension. Viewers must grapple with their own judgments. Does honesty at this stage justify the prior concealment? How much blame belongs to each party? The psychological stakes are heightened further by the cultural dimension. Daniel is not only processing personal betrayal, but also considering familial and ancestral expectations. Lisa's revelation about her spouse being a woman is not just about sexual history, it collides with deeply ingrained values and the anticipated reaction of his uncle. This adds layers of complexity for the audience. The consequences are no longer limited to the emotional, they now extend into cultural obligation and social judgment, increasing the narrative depth and retention potential. As the scene progresses, Daniel's responses become sharper. He reiterates boundaries, refusing intimacy, refusing proximity, refusing to even entertain gestures of affection. Every refusal underscores the consequences of deception. Lisa's anxiety escalates in real time. Her internal monologue, as captured in confessionals, reveals the intensity of her fear. If this doesn't work, if Daniel cannot accept the truth, everything collapses, the engagement, the relationship, and her carefully constructed hopes for the future. This blend of personal stakes, cultural tension, and psychological complexity keeps viewers glued. Mini cliffhangers continue to appear organically. Each time Daniel speaks, each time he pauses, the audience is left wondering, will he leave? Will he consider forgiveness? Will he seek counsel from his uncle immediately, potentially bypassing Lisa's chance to explain further? Every beat sustains tension, layering multiple unresolved questions while gradually revealing emotional depth. The final moments of the act are especially intense. Daniel's anger, disbelief, and hurt reach a crescendo. He is visibly shaken, his voice sharp, his tone commanding. Lisa, standing there with everything exposed, has no choice but to face the immediate fallout of her honesty. The room feels like a pressure cooker, each moment drawn out with deliberate pacing to maximize suspense. The psychological weight of truth versus fear, honesty versus consequence, love versus betrayal saturates every second, holding viewers in a state of intense engagement. By the end of, the confession has fully landed. Trust is shattered, hope is tenuous, and the relationship balance has dramatically shifted. The audience now knows the full scope of Lisa's secret, has seen Daniel's visceral reaction, and is left with the ultimate unresolved question: can this relationship survive, or has this confession crossed the line from which there is no return? The truth is out, the consequences are immediate, and the emotional stakes could not be higher. Lisa has risked everything by revealing her past, and Daniel's reaction has thrown the future of their relationship into uncertainty. The next act will explore the aftermath, the fallout, and whether either of them can navigate the emotional and cultural minefield that now lies between them. Will forgiveness be possible? Or is this truly the end? The storm had passed, but the debris was everywhere. The truth had landed with the force of a thunderclap, and now both Lisa and Daniel were left to sift through what remained. The resort, once a carefully chosen setting for romance and reconciliation, now felt like a stage for reckoning. Every shared space, the poolside cabana, the quiet corners of the hotel, even their separate beds, seemed to hum with the echoes of confession. This was the moment where the relationship was stripped bare. No facades, no calculated moves, no delayed truths, just raw emotion and the uncomfortable clarity that comes after a major revelation. Daniel's expression had shifted. Gone was the immediate shock and anger, replaced with a combination of contemplation, incredulity, and perhaps a slow acceptance that the rules of engagement had changed irrevocably. He had been forced to confront not just Lisa's past, but also the structural foundations of their relationship. The layers of deception, while painful, weren't the only problem. What was becoming clear, and what the audience can sense with every micro expression and pause, is that this relationship had been built on mismatched expectations from the very beginning. Daniel's dreams, heavily intertwined with cultural norms, family approval, and a specific vision of his future, were suddenly in conflict with the reality of Lisa's life choices and identity. Lisa, in turn, was beginning to process the true consequences of her honesty. For weeks, she had operated under the belief that revealing the truth might be her saving grace. She had orchestrated the getaway, interpreted moments of warmth as hope, and mentally prepared herself for a tense but ultimately forgiving resolution. But now, she faced a more painful realization. Honesty doesn't automatically fix broken trust or incompatible expectations. The confession had peeled back the veneer of their bond, exposing fractures she hadn't anticipated and fears she hadn't fully acknowledged. The first hours after the revelation were marked by a heavy, almost suffocating silence. Daniel avoided close contact, moving with careful precision to avoid triggering any further emotional flare-ups. Each glance Lisa attempted was met with a measured, almost clinical response, acknowledgement without warmth. For her, every second stretched endlessly, each moment a reminder that the bridge she had hoped to rebuild might have collapsed entirely. The psychological tension here is critical for viewers to absorb. Daniel's reaction is not just anger, it's cognitive processing under extreme stress. He must reconcile three key realities simultaneously: the magnitude of the lies, the potential implications for his immigration goals and future family structure, and his personal feelings for Lisa. Each consideration introduces a moral and emotional calculus that keeps the audience engaged. Is his hesitation about love, about practicality, about cultural or familial obligation? The ambiguity fuels speculation, maintaining retention. Lisa, meanwhile, oscillates between hope and dread. In private confessionals, she admits to experiencing a strange mixture of relief and terror. Relief that she finally told the truth, terror that the truth may have irrevocably closed the door on any reconciliation. She begins to question her own judgment. Had she misread Daniel's earlier responses? Had her interpretation of his warmth been nothing more than a temporary suspension of judgment rather than genuine emotional alignment? These self-reflective insights deepen the narrative, allowing viewers to see the human complexity beyond the on-screen drama. Small gestures become magnified in this fragile atmosphere. A hesitant smile from Daniel carries the weight of speculation. Is this forgiveness, pity, or merely tolerance? When he steps aside to let Lisa pass, the movement is loaded with unspoken subtext. Every micro-interaction becomes a narrative device, emphasizing the fragility of trust and the psychological aftershocks of betrayal. For viewers, these subtle cues create a sense of immersion, compelling them to parse each behavior for clues about future outcome. As the day progresses, Lisa attempts to initiate a conversation, not to justify herself, but to test the waters of possible repair. She asks carefully structured questions. Do you think we can move past this? Can we find a way forward? Daniel's responses are measured, but non-committal. He acknowledges the complexity, noting that the chain of deception and mismatched expectations cannot be ignored. His language is deliberate, signaling both the difficulty of emotional reconciliation and the possibility of long-term psychological consequences. This moment provides a mini cliffhanger. Viewers are left questioning whether dialogue will lead to understanding or simply confirm irreparable damage. An additional layer of tension emerges as the cultural and familial component resurfaces. Daniel frequently references his uncle and ancestral expectations, even subtly in private exchanges with Lisa. The audience understands that these references are not merely perfunctory, they are deeply influential in his emotional decision-making. The knowledge that family approval, or lack thereof, may override personal attachment adds weight to every interaction, reinforcing the sense that the stakes are far higher than just a personal romantic conflict. Throughout this act, Lisa also confronts a painful internal truth: the relationship might never have been aligned at a foundational level. The confession revealed more than hidden details, it illuminated fundamental incompatibilities. She realizes that the problems were never solely about lies or concealment. Instead, they were about divergent life paths, differing values, and misaligned expectations. For the audience, this reframing is crucial. It shifts the focus from simple scandal to a deeper, more psychologically resonant understanding. Sometimes, relationships fail not because of one catastrophic moment, but because the underlying structure was unstable. The act's tension escalates through several layers of mini-conflicts. Daniel expresses his frustration at the timing of the confession, the cumulative weight of deception, and the potential disruption to future plans. Lisa, in response, oscillates between defensiveness and contrition. Each verbal exchange becomes a microcosm of the larger emotional struggle, offering multiple points for viewer engagement and retention. Audiences are encouraged to debate morality, motivation, and the potential for reconciliation, sustaining attention without resolution. In parallel, the act intersperses moments of reflection. Lisa privately acknowledges to producers that the confession, while terrifying, has also been a relief. For the first time, she feels unburdened from her long-held secret, even as she faces the risk of losing Daniel permanently. This duality, freedom through honesty coupled with the potential for total loss, provides an emotional payoff for viewers while reinforcing the narrative complexity. Daniel's introspection continues throughout the act. He evaluates not just Lisa's truth, but the implications for his own expectations. The audience witnesses the psychological tension between emotional attachment and rational assessment. Can he forgive? Should he continue? Will cultural expectations override personal feelings, or vice versa? These questions remain unresolved but intensely compelling, keeping viewers invested in what comes next. As the act unfolds, subtle behavioral shifts hint at potential pathways without resolving the central conflict. Daniel occasionally softens, allowing brief interactions that suggest he is contemplating forgiveness, yet the overarching tension remains. Lisa interprets these moments with cautious optimism, but the narrative ensures viewers recognize the precarious balance. One misstep, one misinterpretation could shatter the tentative equilibrium. This approach leverages moral tension and ambiguity to maximize engagement, sustaining emotional investment over the long duration. By mid-act, Lisa confronts the implications of Daniel's uncertainty. In private confessional, she articulates a crucial realization: Daniel may never fully accept her identity. The act uses this revelation to deepen stakes. It is no longer just about past deception, it is about existential compatibility. The audience is invited to consider whether love alone can bridge fundamental differences in expectations, identity, and cultural perspective. This insight reframes the story, adding psychological depth beyond the immediate drama. Meanwhile, Daniel continues to navigate his own cognitive dissonance. He weighs personal desire against practical considerations, trust against betrayal, emotional connection against cultural expectation. Each internal calculation is expressed subtly in behavior. A hesitated touch, a delayed response, a measured tone of voice. Viewers are encouraged to interpret these cues, maintaining engagement and reinforcing the narrative's layered complexity. The act also incorporates strategic pauses and silences. These moments are not empty. They are narrative tools that heighten suspense, allowing tension to accumulate naturally. Every silence invites speculation. What is Daniel thinking? Will he act impulsively or deliberately? Will Lisa misread his intentions again? This sustained uncertainty is a core retention mechanism, compelling viewers to stay tuned for the resolution in the final moments. As the day draws toward evening, the couple is left alone with the emotional consequences of the confession. The resort, once a backdrop for potential reconciliation, now mirrors the fractured dynamic between them. Shared activities feel strained, small gestures of intimacy are tentative at best, yet there are fleeting moments of connection. Daniel laughing at something minor, Lisa noticing a small smile which inject optimism and sustain viewer investment. These oscillations between hope and tension are critical for emotional pacing and long-form retention. The act's climax is not a dramatic reconciliation or confrontation, but a quiet, unsettling understanding. Both Lisa and Daniel recognize the fragility of what remains. Lisa, through introspection and confessionals, admits she may have misjudged the power of honesty to save the relationship. Daniel, through his behavior, acknowledges the impossibility of ignoring incompatibilities, no matter how strong residual affection may be. The audience is left with a sense of resolution and clarity, if not in reconciliation, a psychologically satisfying but emotionally tense conclusion. Many cliffhangers pepper this final act. Every hesitated gesture, every ambiguous glance, every carefully worded sentence leaves the audience questioning the next step. Will Daniel ultimately leave? Will Lisa adjust her expectations? Could there be a reconciliation in a future episode? Or is this truly the emotional endpoint? These open-ended questions, combined with the psychological insights provided, create a layered retention structure that sustains viewer attention to the very end. By the conclusion of the central emotional question, can the relationship survive the compounded betrayals and misalignments, is addressed with nuance. The narrative clarifies that trust, once broken multiple times and compounded by fundamental incompatibilities, may be irreparable. Yet it does so without resorting to melodrama or simplistic resolution. The audience leaves with a complex understanding. The moment of truth did not destroy the relationship, it revealed the instability that was already there. Transition to post-episode insight, viewers are left with the takeaway that sometimes revelations do more than shock, they clarify. Lisa's honesty has provided clarity both for herself and Daniel, even if it comes at the cost of romantic resolution. Daniel's measured responses offer insight into the ways cultural expectations, personal desire, and emotional resilience interact under extreme pressure. This reflective close allows for psychological closure while leaving narrative space for speculation, debate, and continued audience engagement. As the screen fades and the episode prepares to wrap, the audience is left with a mixture of satisfaction and tension. The truth has been revealed, the character's psychology has been illuminated, and yet the ultimate outcome remains uncertain. This carefully engineered combination of emotional payoff and reflective insight ensures that viewers remain engaged, emotionally invested, and primed for discussion, commentary, and anticipation of future developments. The final act, in essence, delivers a layered emotional experience. Shock transforms into reflection, tension into understanding, and drama into insight. It bridges the gap between entertainment and psychological analysis, providing a satisfying narrative arc while sustaining curiosity about the character's next move. In the world of high-stakes reality drama, this is the kind of closure that leaves viewers both content and compelled to return for more.